We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to be?
There's a change going on in the European political landscape, and it's not an academic discussion. Although their agendas vary from country to country, political parties appealing to some form of traditional or nationalistic values have recently garnered significant foothold in Parliament. This is the case in Finland, Norway, Holland, Hungary, Sweden, and Italy. But there's often one common concern. What do you say to those people who say Turkey can't join the European Union because it's a Muslim country?
Well, I think they are making the biggest mistake of their life. To claim that Turkey is Muslim is a day late, a dollar short argument.
Turkey, at the doorstep of Europe, wants to come in. Despite growing anti-Muslim sentiment and a deepening economic downturn in Europe, the country is still negotiating to become a full member of the European Union. Why? Turkey's Minister for European Affairs and Chief EU Negotiator talks to Al Jazeera. Egemen Bagis, Turkish Minister for European Affairs and Chief Negotiator, thank you very much for speaking to Al Jazeera.
Pleasure is mine.
The first natural question, I guess, would be, given the current economic turmoil the European Union is experiencing, the debt crisis, the political and bureaucratic nightmare that some would describe the European Union as becoming the uncertain future of the bloc, is Turkey today still as interested in joining the EU, or has your perspective changed perhaps?
Well, I wouldn't say our perspective have changed. I think we're as devout as we were in day one, as far as increasing our standards to the EU standards. The process itself is more important than the end result. Turkey started back in 1959. Those days our per capita income was around $300. Now it's more than $11,000 and it's constantly growing. We had 14 universities back then. Now we have more than 200 and more are being built. In those years, our annual tourism income was $9 million. Now it's more than $30 billion, and it's increasing. This year, we broke our record by increasing number of tourists that came to Turkey by 20%, and we exceeded 33 million international visitors. So things are going for the better in Turkey, and the European Union standards have been a very important part of it. But joining the European Union is a question of time and how. European Union is not a club that Turkey will join tomorrow. Turkey will join
So
European
what
Union
timeline are you looking at?
Turkey will join the European Union when both Turkey and European Union are ready. European Union, as you mentioned, is going through a turmoil right now. But we have never looked at this union as a merely economic union. If you look at the history of member countries of EU, actually you see a lot of blood, tear, and fear and pain. But European Union has ensured sustainable peace on the continent. That is why I consider EU not to be a political or an economic union, but it is the grandest peace project of the history of mankind.
So you
that
are
is why we are still interested in joining the EU, because we think...
As a full member?
Yes, as a full member, because we think we can turn that continental peace project into a global one.
Okay.
Because Turkey's EU aspirations are being followed here in Doha, in India, in China, in Africa, throughout the world, not only by Muslim people, but people who feel they have been ignored and isolated by the West.
Let me just put this to you. Because of the economic crisis precisely, more European countries now, it seems, are even more reluctant on seeing Turkey join the bloc. What would Turkey bring to the EU? What would you bring to the table? How would Turkey contribute to European economic growth? Because again, the key word today seems to be the economy.
Well, the key word today is Turkey, because Turkey is the key to many of Europe's problems and upcoming challenges. Let's talk about them. Europe is in an economic crisis. Turkey is the fastest growing economy in Europe, with more than 8% growth in the last 5 years consecutively. Turkey is proving that we have a solid base for strong, growing, sustainable economy. Turkey has a young population as well. Europe is aging. The median age in Germany right now is 45. But median age in Turkey is 28. I happen to be one of the youngest ministers in the government, but 70% of my nation is younger than I am. Turkey can also bring that young, dynamic workforce, well-educated workforce to Europe. Europe has an energy crisis. 70% of energy resources that Europe needs are either to the south, north, or east of Turkey. Unless someone can come up with a new wireless technology of energy distribution, Turkey's cooperation is a must. The number of plants that are available in Turkey exceed the number of plants in 27 member countries alone. So Turkey has the youngest, most dynamic, and the largest military in Europe.
Well, as you say,
in all those matters, Turkey is very critical. But the most important matter is Turkey is the most eastern part of the West and most western part of the East. In my own constituency in Istanbul, you can find churches, synagogues, and mosques standing side by side for more than 800 years, giving peace to humanity. That is the notion that Europe needs right now to fight against xenophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and all those aspects. I think Turkey can be a very important contributor.
What do you say to those people who say Turkey can't join the European Union because it's a Muslim country?
Well, I think they are making the biggest mistake of their life. First of all, by the next 10 years, 10% of Europe will be Muslim anyhow. Right now, there are around 30 million Muslim people living in Europe, and that number will exceed 50 million within 10 years. Secondly, as I mentioned, Turkey's aspirations did not start yesterday. We have been working on this project for 52 years. To claim that Turkey is Muslim is a day late, a dollar short argument. Then Turkey should not be given a date to start accession negotiations. Turkey should not have become a member of the customs union. Turkey should not be contributing to the European security and defense projects. Turkey should not be having 50% of her trade with Europe. 60% of tourists that come to Turkey come from EU. 90% of global investments that are investing in Turkey have come from EU. So all those issues prove that Europe needs Turkey as well, because Turkey can also pass on the message to 1.5 billion Muslims around the world.
Right. Well, before we get to that, I want to discuss that further, of course, Mr. Bagis, but I want to come back to the economic crisis. As you've mentioned yourself, Turkey has certainly benefited from being outside the bloc during this crisis. The latest indicators are that the economy has expanded by 8% in 2011. The unemployment level...
The problem is not being in the bloc.
I know.
The problem is those who are in the bloc did not obey their own rules. The concept of unanimity really put EU into an awkward situation. They all knew some countries were lying on the numbers. They all knew some countries were not accurate, but they looked the other way. Why? Because they needed the vote of the very same countries on other matters. That unanimity rule put EU into a very difficult situation. It's time for them to wake up and smell the coffee. The problem is some Europeans who work 65 hours a week are fed up paying the bills of some other Europeans who are pretending to work 25 hours a week. And people want to have their own economic region.
You've certainly had a privileged position being by the ringside as this is happening in Europe. By joining the bloc, wouldn't this expose Turkey to unemployment? Wouldn't this expose Turkey to deflation, as is the case for Greece and other Mediterranean countries?
If we had joined, we would have warned them and prevented them from going into these difficult situations. So maybe we could have prevented Europe from going down. Secondly, by joining Europe, that doesn't mean we are assuming their debts. That doesn't mean we're assuming their unemployment. Right now, Turkey has one of the lowest unemployment in Europe. And the fact that we will join the European Union is not something that will happen tomorrow. By the time Turkey completes her negotiations, by the time all the chapters are completed, I'm sure this economic crisis will be over, because no crisis lasts forever. But even in the case that there are still difficulties, Turkey can contribute positively to fixing the gap, to closing the gap.
All right. So the accession negotiations began back in October 2005, officially anyway. 7 years on, what's the state of play? Where do things stand?
Turkey is much more democratic.
No, I'm talking about the negotiations with the European
I'll come to
Union.
it. Turkey is much more democratic, much more transparent, much more prosperous, much more self-confident and richer. As far as the chapters are concerned, we have opened 13 of the 33 chapters. There are 20 more chapters to go. Unfortunately, 17 of them are blocked.
Right.
We cannot open them even if we want to, because one country or another has imposed their vetoes on them.
Out of the
but
35
we don't care about these vetoes. We don't assess the process by number of chapters that have been opened. We assess the process by number of reform laws that have passed through the Turkish parliament.
So the pace has been slow anyway, because out of the 35 chapters, only one has been closed officially.
The pace of technical negotiation process might be slow, but the pace of reform has been faster than ever. To give you an example.
Who is to blame for the slow pace? Just so we're clear on this. Who's responsible?
8 chapters
for this?
have been blocked by a unanimous decision of the Council because of Cyprus issue. In addition to those 8 chapters, the Greek Cypriot administration has announced that they would veto 6 other chapters. Mr. Sarkozy in Paris has announced that he would veto the opening of 5 chapters. There are some countries that have blocked the visa-free travel of Turkish citizens to Schengen region. So there are many to be blamed, but we are not in a blaming game here. We're in a strategic plan of increasing Turkey's standards.
Okay.
And if we have changed the standards of our toys that our kids play with, if we have changed the air quality in Turkey by making sure fuels that release more carbon monoxide cannot be used in city centers, or if we have made sure that our food has higher hygiene standards, these are the important aspects of this relationship, and that's what I mean when I say Turkey is a better country to raise my own kids.
All right, let's move on to another chapter if we can. You said Turkey has made a great deal of improvements as far as addressing the issues that the European Union has. But when we look at chapter 24, for instance, of these negotiation chapters regarding justice and freedom in Turkey, the EU says, and I quote this, Turkey still needs to make further considerable efforts in the domain of justice and freedom. The Council of Europe most recently raised questions about Turkish judiciary, saying that it threatens fundamental human rights. In one of their recent reports, in fact, they expressed concern about the arrest of political party members being held without trial for many years. What is being done to reform Turkey's judiciary? The pace, again, here seems very slow.
Well, in democracies take time to reform because you have to convince your opposition, you have to convince your parliament, you have to convince your NGOs, you have to convince your public opinion, and then you can move ahead. But last year, on September 12th of 2010, Turkish people went to the polls and voted to amend their constitution. 58% of my nation voted in accordance with a big constitutional amendment package, and most of it had to do with judicial reform. Right now, we're working on a second package of judicial reform, and we're trying to make sure that our courts work faster. I myself was prosecuted 4 years ago as a politician because of a statement I had made, which was people's representatives should represent the people. Some prosecutors thought that sentence was very provocative and I should be banned from politics. So today, it's like a joke.
Well,
but those days, it took me
Minister,
8 months to defend myself.
Again, you say progress has been made. Yes, certainly. But the issue of freedom of expression, the media reforms, for instance, we're still seeing journalists being arrested in Turkey for a country that's hailed as a model of democracy for the Muslim world.
Some journalists are imprisoned for killing people. Some journalists are imprisoned for
under
robbing banks.
law, under the anti-terrorism
Even one
law.
journalist who has been prisoned because of his ideas is too many. We cannot allow that because the leader of my party, the Prime Minister of Turkey himself, had been imprisoned 12 years ago for reciting a poem. No one cares about freedom of speech as much as we do in Turkey.
But how do you explain then that Reporters Without Borders ranks Turkey as 138 when it comes to press freedom out of 178 countries?
I don't know what their criteria is, but all I can tell you is
the criteria is that journalists can't speak freely.
Turkey has a terrorism problem. We are fighting against PKK terrorism, and unfortunately...
And that's often the law that's mentioned when journalists are arrested, the anti-terrorism law, which becomes a blur sometimes. You know, it's very difficult to understand how these journalists are being charged under the anti-terrorism law.
Well, again, I am criticizing my judicial branch more than you do, but we have to respect their decisions. They prosecuted me as a member of government. They prosecuted and tried to ban me from politics. But this is how things are. Right now, for the first time, we have a consensus committee in the Turkish parliament where all 4 political parties have equal representation. And they are working on a new constitution. Hopefully, we will be able to come up with a civilian constitution that would embrace all of the citizens, and we will find the legal means of preventing that kind of legal cases.
All right. Now, it would seem Mr. Bagis, that even within Turkey, the support for EU accession is dropping. According to a public opinion poll conducted in 2011 by the TEPA think tank, only 54% of Turks, which is still a majority, I give you that, 54% of Turks are in favor of joining the EU compared to 58% back in 2008. So there seems to be a decrease. Furthermore, another survey shows that 55% of Turks assume that their values are very different from those of the West. So how do you convince your public opinion that joining the EU is the right thing to do? How do you improve this gloomy mood that seems to be taking a hold of Turks?
Well, I am trying my best, but I also need ammunition from my European colleagues. Turkey is the only candidate country whose citizens have to apply for a visa when they want to travel to Europe. We are in the customs union. 50% of our trade is with Europe. Our goods can travel freely, but the owners of the goods cannot. That doesn't make sense. You mentioned terrorism. Turkey is fighting against international terrorism, but unfortunately PKK is soliciting funds in some of our ally countries. They are broadcasting out of some EU member states asking people to turn their kids into terrorists. PKK is not only a terrorist organization, it is the largest network of drug trafficking in Europe and human trafficking in Europe. For all these type of international terrorism problems, no country can deal with it alone. But that's why I always argue Berlin, Brussels, Paris, and London are not safe unless Istanbul, Ankara, Diyarbakir are safe. That's why we have to work together on all these issues.
Just coming back to my question about Turkish public opinion, it seems that they're not as convinced as they were 4 or 5 years ago that joining the EU is the right thing to do, that they're perhaps more convinced about turning their eyes towards the Arab world, because we've seen Turkey take a leadership role in the Muslim world after the Arab Spring anyway, that's still going on. Turkey has played an influential role in the Arab
Influential,
Spring.
yes, but leader role, I would not argue that. Turkey has no interest in being anyone else's leader. Turkey has great accomplishments in the last 200 years of combining culture of Islam with culture of democracy. But we have also made some major mistakes. It's up to each and every country to draw their own lessons from our experiences, both from our accomplishments and from our mistakes. But Turks are capable. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. The fact that we are enhancing our relations with the countries in the Middle East, in the Caucasus, in the Balkans, in Central Asia, doesn't mean that we have to give up our relations with European Union.
No change in Turkey's foreign policy where EU membership is perhaps no longer a priority and rather...
EU membership is a priority, but other relationships are also among our priorities. Turkey has always been viewed as a bridge between East and West, bridge between Islam and Christianity, a bridge between Asia and Europe, a bridge between energy resources and consumers. For any bridge to be dependable, it has to sit on at least 4 strong legs. Turkey is strengthening the southern leg, the northern leg, the eastern leg, and the western leg simultaneously. Turkey is not shifting anywhere. Turkey is still where she is, but Turkey is getting more popular. Turkey is getting more democratic. Turkey is getting richer. Turkey is becoming more self-confident. And Turkey has experiences. People who risk their own lives in Egypt, in Libya, in Tunisia, look at Turkey and they say, well, look at Turkey. We are of the same culture, same tradition, same values, but they have done it. They have a strong economy. They have better jobs. They have labor unions. They have freedom of speech. Why can we not have the same? So Turkey has become a source of inspiration.
It has become an example for Muslim countries. Yes,
but what has made Turkey different? The EU reforms. That's why every time some narrow-minded politician in Europe attacks Turkey's EU ambitions, they're also attacking the dreams of people in other parts of the world.
All right, coming to that, French President Nicolas Sarkozy is one of the most perhaps vocal opponent of Turkey's EU membership. Let's talk about French-Turkish relations, which it seems have hit a rock bottom recently with the passing of the Armenian genocide law in the French parliament, which still hasn't been signed by President Sarkozy. It seems that the French are somewhat, despite the frosty relations, keen to patch things up with Turkey. Is that also the case with Ankara? Are you willing to defuse this crisis, or has a line been crossed and there's no going back, perhaps?
77 French senators signed a petition to the Constitutional Court to nullify the parliamentary decision about limiting freedom of speech. That has nothing to do with 1915 events of the Armenians or the suffering of the Turks, Armenians, Arabs, Kurds. This was a direct attempt to limit freedom of speech because
That's
it would ban introducing new documents, introducing new evidence, which doesn't make sense. If you look at the values of the French Constitution, if you look at the values of France, which is one of the founding members of EU, these are attempts to really put these values backwards.
Okay, let's not derail the conversation.
I don't think President Sarkozy had anything against Turkey per se. I don't think.
Do you think it was an electoral, perhaps?
Definitely,
point?
He was trying to switch Le Pen votes from the extreme right to the center right.
Okay.
And he, instead of attacking Islam, he tried to attack Turkey, and he thought by that way he could keep the 10% Muslim population of France on his side, plus get the anti-Turkish, anti-Muslim, extreme Christian votes to center-right.
France is not the only one that recognizes the Armenian genocide. 21 countries, the European Parliament, Germany, Italy, all recognize the Armenian genocide as have taken place in 1915.
Recognizing 1915 events as pain is something I would understand. But trying to limit freedom of expression, trying to limit debate.
Is Turkey angry because there's a, you say, limitation of freedom of expression, or is it because France is criminalizing, denying the Armenian genocide?
Well, France is criminalizing speaking your views.
But that's France's problem, isn't it?
No. There are Turkish kids who grow up in France, and you would be prosecuting them without due process. That doesn't make sense. Turkey's Prime Minister, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is the first Turkish politician ever who has written a letter to President of Armenia and has publicly said, I am ready to face my own history if you're ready to face yours.
But
let us open all our archives. Let's establish a committee of historians, not only from the two countries, but also from third countries, and study this scientifically, historically, anthropologically, politically, and let these scholars come up with a report which we should look at and issue our own judgments and make a deal. Unfortunately, the government of Armenia has not been courageous enough to accept this offer. We are willing to look into our archives.
Would you be willing to apologize in the future for what happened
if
back
it
in
is
1950?
unanimously accepted, historical, scientifically proven fact? Of course, why not?
But many people say
which
law,
nation's
it's
history
a
is 100%
fact.
clear,
Okay.
Folly? Can you tell me any nation who does not have any dark periods or pains in their past? But we need to first explore what happened. The archives we have, the scholars, Turkish scholars who have studied what we have, show us very clearly that this was not a genocide. The word genocide is a very serious word. And we have
1.5 million, according to
some. But Justin McCarthy, who has written a book on this, says only 650,000 Armenians were killed. At the same time, 2 million Muslims were killed. This was a civil war during a world war. Who can argue what was a genocide and what wasn't?
Okay.
That's why I'm saying, in 1915, Ottoman Empire's closest ally was Germany. I wonder what's in the German archives. The Armenian Revolutionary Federation, which was established in 1893, 22 years before the alleged events of 1915, have a big archive in Boston, United States. Only Armenian historians are allowed to look into those archives. I wonder what's in them. The French, they should look into their archives and see what their ambassadors reported back in 1915. The Brits, the Russian, all these countries who were very active in the Ottoman Palace should now open up their archives and share this with the international observers and scholars before you can make a judgment.
If France were to approve this law, if President Sarkozy was to sign this law, what would Turkey do? What retaliatory action are you looking at?
I would ask them to use their imagination.
Can you elaborate?
I am hoping that the French Constitutional Court will nullify that decision.
What
and
if
we
it's
will not
voted into law? What happens? You've already frozen diplomatic relations. Military cooperation is halted. What else?
Watch us.
You're not going to give it away, are you?
Not here,
Okay.
not now.
Okay, well, we'll leave it on that note. Egemen Bagis, thank you very much for speaking to Al Jazeera.